During Sunday lunch, my daughter called me a disgusting old man right in front of my 4 young grandchildren. Kids get away from that disgusting old man. He smells bad and he is gross. While everyone laughed and my grandchildren looked at me with contempt, I pulled out my phone and made a call on speakerphone. Hello, Mr. Miller. Yes, it is me. I want to update my will right now. Remove my daughter's name immediately from the $2.5 million. She choked on her food, and her face turned purple while her husband dropped his fork onto his plate. When I hung up the phone, the worst happened. Before we continue, welcome back to the channel. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon because we have new stories every single day. Hit the like button and let us know in the comments which city you are visiting us from. The silence grew thick as if someone had slammed the windows shut and cut the power to the air conditioning. The children who seconds before were watching me with faces full of disgust now sat petrified, not fully understanding the scope of my words. My daughter Sarah swallowed with difficulty, hitting her chest, while her husband Eric offered her a glass of water with trembling hands. I did not take my eyes off her. 63 years of watching that woman grow, caring for her through illnesses, through falls, protecting her from the men who once hurt her, and now she called me a disgusting old man as if I were a burden, an embarrassment, human waste, sitting at the table. I remembered that the smell of the pot roast was still floating in the dining room. The white tablecloth with embroidered flowers, an heirloom from her mother, was full of crumbs and grease. The wine opened less than an hour ago now, tasted like the metallic flavor of betrayal. Dad, Sarah managed to say between coughs, her face red, her eyes shining with rage and fear. Don't be ridiculous. That was not serious. Ah! I interrupted with a calmness I did not recognize in myself. Of course it was serious. Your words always are. No one else dared to intervene. My other son, David, watched the scene with his mouth half open, as if he suddenly understood that this lunch would not be a pleasant memory for his children, but a crack that would be impossible to close. I remained silent for a few seconds, enjoying the tension, because there was something in that moment that, although painful, gave me a strange sense of justice. For years I had swallowed the humiliations, the poisonous comments disguised as jokes, the looks of pity when I complained about my arthritis or my sleepless nights. But that word, disgusting, thrown in front of my grandkids, it had ignited a fire in me that I could no longer put out. The children did not move from their chairs. The oldest, Justin, barely 9 years old, looked at me with a furrowed brow as if my mere presence made him uncomfortable. The little one, Lucy, hid her head on her mother's shoulder as if I were a monster. That image drove into my chest like a knife. I poured myself another glass of wine. I raised it with a slowness that was almost theatrical, and looked at it against the light, as if toasting with the ghosts that always accompany me. I thought of her mother, of how she would be watching all of this from wherever she was, and I could not help but smile with bitterness. Ridiculous, I repeated as if savoring the word. Then I took a sip and added, the only ridiculous thing has been this theater of fake love for years. Eric, the son-in-law, tried to compose himself and let out a nervous laugh, as if to dilute the poison of my words. Come on, Michael. It is not that big of a deal. Sarah was just joking. You know how she is. I turned my gaze toward him slowly, like someone pointing a weapon. Do not take me for an idiot, Eric. A joke is when everyone laughs, not when one person is left destroyed. He lowered his eyes like a scolded child. Then I understood that I had touched a nerve. He did not expect the discomfort of a man who never had the courage to contradict his wife and who lived off my silence and my generosity. The food was getting cold on the plates, but nobody was hungry. The murmur of the television on in the living room with some distant football game seemed like a mockery from another world, a reminder that outside life went on, while here in my dining room something was dying. The phone still rested on the tablecloth, the black screen like a watching eye. I knew that Mr. Miller would answer at any moment, and that my words were not just an outburst. They were a decree. In that moment, something unexpected happened. It was not a scream, nor a blow, nor a feint. It was a silence, but a silence that weighed like thunder, because the children who, until then, had remained in the background, broke the calm with a phrase that tore me apart more than all of their mother's words. "Mom is right," said Justin, looking at me with the coldness of a miniature adult. "You smell bad." Lucy laughed, imitating her brother. The other two, infected by it, let out stifled giggles. And Sarah, as if she had received divine forgiveness, hugged them with pride. I felt like the world was collapsing under my feet. It was no longer my daughter who despised me. It was my grandchildren, my supposed descendants, my hope of continuity. The blood that I one day thought would remember me with affection was now mocking me as if I were a clown. I brought the wine glass to my lips and finished it in one gulp. I set the glass on the table with a dry thud. And while the bitterness burned my throat, I knew that this would not end with this pathetic Sunday scene. Something bigger was coming, something that would make the foundations of my entire family shake. Because the worst, the absolute worst, was yet to happen. That night after lunch, I locked myself in my bedroom and turned off the lights. The silence was so thick that I could hear even the creaking of my own bones when I sat on the bed. I closed my eyes, but I could not rest. Instead of sleep, memories came as if someone had released them from a dusty drawer that I no longer wanted to open. I saw Sarah, my daughter, at barely 6 years old, running through the yard in a yellow dress that her mother had sewn with her own hands. She had scraped knees, hair full of dirt, and a laugh so contagious that even the birds seemed to stop to listen to her. I would chase her with a bucket of water, and she would scream, between bursts of laughter, "Daddy, Daddy, you can't catch me." And although I could catch her, I always let myself be defeated. I would fall to the ground, feigning exhaustion. She would throw herself around my neck, and I would hug her tightly. That little girl existed. She was not an invention of my memory. She was real, and I held her in my arms. Then another image came to me more bitter. Sarah in full adolescence, with eyes lit up with rebellion. I worked 12 hours a day in the carpentry shop, destroying my back so that my children would lack nothing. I would come home covered in sawdust with cracked hands, and I would meet her hard gaze, her impatient tone. Teresa, her mother, was the one who cushioned the blows. I was the ogre who imposed rules, the one who did not allow late nights out or bad company. And yet there was a day when Sarah came home crying because a boy had dumped her. I did not know what to say to her. I only bought her an ice cream and sat next to her in the park. She rested her head on my shoulder and murmured, "Thanks, Dad. You are the only one who is always there." That phrase sustained me for years like a lighthouse, reminding me that my sacrifice made sense. But everything changed when Teresa got sick. Sarah was already a woman of 20 years. We spent entire months between hospital's medicines and bills I could not pay. I split myself into 1,000 pieces to get the money, and even so, I felt that everything was insufficient. Teresa was consuming herself, and I was consumed with her. I remember seeing Sarah brushing her hair at night, singing to her in a low voice so she would fall asleep. Then I thought, what a good woman life is forging in my daughter. But when her mother died, something broke inside her. The tenderness transformed into rage, and that rage turned against me. She blamed me for not having done more, for not having money for another treatment, for being a common, ordinary man. I stayed silent because I understood that behind those words there was pain. But over the years I discovered that this pain turned into contempt. Then came Eric. I never trusted him. I met him with that overly wide smile, the kind used by men who hide more than they show. Sarah loved him, and I did not dare to stand in the way. Let her be happy, even if she is wrong, I thought. They got married, and at the wedding I cried like a child, not because I was losing her, but because I knew she no longer needed me. Eric seemed decent at first, but soon I saw who he really was. A climber, someone who measured people by what they had and not by who they were. And Sarah went following that same path as if she caught his hunger for status. They moved to a big house surrounded by luxuries, and little by little I was relegated to an uncomfortable corner of her life. One afternoon, when I was going to accompany them to a gathering, Sarah looked me up and down and said, "Dad, you can't go with that old jacket. People talk." That phrase went through me like a spear. It was not just a comment. It was a sentence. To her, I had become someone to be ashamed of. The only thing that saved me for a time was my grandchildren. When Justin was born, they allowed me to watch him some afternoons. I walked him in the stroller, proud to show everyone he was my grandson. Then came Matt, Lucy, and Claire, and each one of them gave me back the illusion of living. I told them made-up stories, took them to the square, taught them to distinguish the smell of woods. This is cedar, this is pine, this is oak. I repeated it with the hope of leaving them a memory that someday when I was no longer here, they would associate those scents with me. For a time it worked. They hugged me, they looked for me, they called me Grandpa with tenderness. But Sarah was always there planting her poison. "Don't get dirty with that old man, don't smell like him, don't pay attention to his old-fashioned things." And so little by little the children began to imitate her words. What was once affection transformed into rejection until the incident on Sunday occurred. And the worst was hearing Justin repeat the insult with the same coldness as his mother. That night I looked at myself in the mirror. The light was dim and my face looked like that of a stranger. Deep wrinkles furrowed my forehead. Dark circles were profound, and gray hair barely covered my head. I got close and inhaled. I smelled of cheap soap, of wood, of old age perhaps. I asked myself if I was truly disgusting, if my grandkids were right to look at me with repugnance. I asked myself if I had become a burden. I thought of Teresa. She always told me, "Michael, don't let Sarah confuse love with convenience. Protect her, even from herself." And I understood that perhaps that was my mistake in not protecting her from her own pride. I gave her everything I had, even what I could not spare, but I never taught her to value what really mattered. I lay on the bed with the phone in my hand, the lawyer's number still on the screen, and realized that my decision to remove her from the will was not an outburst, but the consequence of a lifetime. Sarah would have to look at herself in the mirror someday and recognize what she had made of herself. It was not revenge, it was justice. And with that thought, I fell asleep, knowing that the worst was still to come. The Sunday scene repeated itself over and over in my head, like a scratched record that I could not stop. There was something in those laughs, in those eyes of my grandchildren shining with mockery, that left me breathless. But what weighed on me the most was not the insult itself, but the certainty that it had not been an accident, nor a momentary reaction. There was poison at that table, and it had been distilling in silence for years. When I looked at Sarah again that day with her face unhinged and her breath jagged, I saw more than my daughter. I saw a woman dominated by resentment, as if she had been accumulating hate for too long that needed to come out all at once. And I also saw Eric, with his hand still trembling, trying to compose himself. The fork fallen on the plate was the perfect metaphor. A man who did not know how to hold onto what he had in front of him. No one dared to speak. David, my younger son, barely breathed. His eyes went from his sister to me as if looking for a life preserver that did not exist. His children, my other two grandkids, stared fixedly at their plates. Too small still to understand the magnitude of what was happening, but enough to feel that something irreparable had broken. I broke the silence with a minimal gesture. I poured myself another glass of wine. The liquid fell into the glass with a crisp sound amplified by everyone's muteness. I took a sip and tasted the bitterness. It was not just from the wine. It was the bitterness of knowing myself surrounded by betrayals disguised as family. "Your words cannot be erased, Sarah," I said with a low but firm voice. "Do not try to backpedal now." She stood up suddenly. tears running down her makeup, and screamed, "It's just that you don't understand anything. You were always hard. You always judged me. You never let me be who I wanted to be. You are a selfish old man." Eric tried to grab her by the arm, but she pushed him away as if he burned her. She looked at me with a hatred so pure that for an instant I believe she hated me more than she had ever loved me. I observed her in silence, and then, like a revelation, I understood that what had come out of her mouth was not improvised. It was not the fury of a moment. It was something that had been fermenting for years, perhaps since her mother died, maybe even since before. The lunch had only been the perfect excuse to let escape everything she carried inside. Eric, nervous, tried to fix the atmosphere. "Mr. Michael, let's not get like this. Family is family. You know we all love you." I turned toward him calmly. "Do not use the word love lightly, Eric. You have never loved me. You have only tolerated me because I represent something you covet." He swallowed hard, lowering his gaze like a child caught in a lie. And there I saw him clearly, the son-in-law who had settled into my shadow, waiting for the day when that shadow disappeared to keep what I had built with my hands. In that moment, Sarah let out a dry laugh, as if she wanted to tear away with it the little dignity I had left. "Do you really think I care about your money?" she spat with burning eyes. "The only thing that matters is that you are no one anymore. You are an old man who smells bad, who is no longer useful. Do you know what my children think of you? That you are a nuisance?" The words went through my chest like knives. Not because they were new, but because they were coming out of the mouth of the same girl who once told me I was the only one who was always there. I looked at Justin, the oldest, and saw he was nodding in silence, repeating his mother's words internally. The table, which should have been a place of union, had transformed into an invisible battlefield. It was a burial shroud covering the remains of a family that had died in that very instant. I stood up slowly, leaning my hands on the back of my chair to support myself. I felt my knees weak, but my voice came out strong, more than I expected. "If you consider me a nuisance," I said, looking at everyone one by one, "then I will leave. But remember something. A nuisance steps aside, but a father, on the other hand, leaves footprints. And those footprints, you are going to carry them on you, even if you want to erase them." The silence was absolute. Sarah watched me with her face deformed by rage. Eric avoided my gaze, the children whispered among themselves, and David seemed about to break. I picked up my phone, left the half-finished glass of wine, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I turned my head. "You all believe the worst has already passed. You have no idea." And I closed the door behind me, taking with me not only my wounded dignity, but also a decision that could no longer be contained. Because what happened at that table was not an accident. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The worst, as always, was still to happen. That night, I could not sleep. The clock marked 2:34 in the morning, and I kept tossing and turning in bed like a caged animal. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same scene, Sarah's face contorted by hate, the laughter of my grandchildren repeating the insult like an echo, Eric's cowardly silence, and David's broken look. The darkness of the room was not enough to cover the clarity of that memory. I asked myself over and over where I had failed. Was I too severe when she was a child? Too poor to give her the life she deserved? Too clumsy to fill the void that Teresa left? The word disgusting resonated in my mind like a war drum. It was more than an insult. It was the sentence of someone who had decided that I was no longer worth anything. I got up, went to the bathroom, and turned on the light. The mirror gave me back the image of a man I no longer recognized. Deep wrinkles, tired skin, eyes dim like coals growing cold. I brought my face close to the glass, breathed deep, and tried to smell myself. Truly, I smelled bad. I felt the aroma of cheap soap, a trace of wine, perhaps the sweat of the afternoon, but nothing unbearable. However, what matters is not the real smell, but what they decide to see in me. And if they see me as a disgusting old man, then that is the truth that stays engraved in them. I sat on the edge of the bathtub with a towel over my legs and remembered moments when Sarah had let slip small doses of contempt. Once at Christmas 3 years ago, when I gifted her a hand-knitted wool coat, she opened it in front of everyone, looked at it coldly, and said, "Thanks, Dad, but these knits aren't used anymore." Everyone laughed, and I swallowed hard without answering. Another time, when I wanted to take the kids to the workshop to teach them to sandwood, she interrupted me. "No, Dad, I don't want them smelling like sawdust or getting dirty with those old things." I nodded as if she were right, but it hurt like a blow to the chest. Those scenes had accumulated like layers of dust on my dignity, and I, instead of cleaning them, had let them be believing that with time she would reconsider. I was wrong. The dust had turned into a crust, and the crust into a scar, and now in front of my grandkids, the wound opened into raw flesh. It was not just my daughter's betrayal, it was the silent complicity of everyone else. David, my younger son, who was always quiet and a peacemaker, stayed paralyzed, incapable of defending me. Eric, with that servile smile, preferred to hide his head. And my grandchildren, they laughed. That was the final stab. I remembered the nights I stayed awake to pay for Sarah's college, the furniture I built with my own hands, and sold for half its price the vacations I never took because I saved everything for them. I asked myself what good it did. What was left of me for them? Only the idea that I am a hindrance, an unpleasant smell, a bother. I lay down again with my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Then Teresa's voice appeared in my mind, clear as if she were by my side. "Michael," she always told me, "take care of Sarah even if she doesn't understand. Don't let her get lost." And for the first time I felt that I had failed. Not because Sarah insulted me, but because I had not known how to prevent her from becoming the woman she was now, cold, arrogant, incapable of recognizing where she comes from. Tears surprised me. I hadn't cried in years. I cried like a child in silence so as not to wake anyone biting the sheet, to drown the sobs. I wasn't crying just for the insult, but for the certainty that I had lost my daughter long before that lunch. Sunday was just the confirmation, but amidst the tears, I felt something different. It wasn't just pain. It was rage, a rage that was forming in the deepest part of my chest, like an ember refusing to go out, and that rage gave me strength. I got out of bed and looked for the phone. The lawyer's number was still saved on the screen. I observed it for a long while, with fingers trembling over the keypad. The decision was made. It was not revenge, not yet. It was justice, a justice that had been postponed for too long. When I went back to bed, the sunrise was peeking through the window. The sky was painted a heavy gray, as if the city itself shared my mourning. I settled between the sheets, damp from my tears, and swore to myself that I would never again allow such humiliation. What Sarah did not know is that with her insult, she had awakened in me something that not even I knew existed, the determination not to leave my life in the hands of those who despise me. And as the sun began to illuminate the room, I understood that the true weight of the betrayal was not what Sarah had said to me. It was what I was about to do with that pain. The week after the lunch was a silent procession of memories and poisoned thoughts. The air seemed heavier, and every corner of my house was full of echoes of Teresa, of Sarah, as a child of the days when everything was different. It was hard for me to accept that what had happened on Sunday was not an accident, but the result of something that had been brewing for much longer. Sarah had not improvised that contempt. She had cultivated it like a dark seed that finally bloomed in front of my grandkids. One afternoon, while reviewing some papers in the workshop, I found a folder that I hadn't opened in years. It was a file with invoices, receipts, letters. Among them were notes from Sarah, written when she was a teenager, requests for money, excuses for not arriving early, small deceits that I overlooked at the time. But rereading them with old eyes, I realized they were not innocent. Sarah had learned from very early on to manipulate me to get what she wanted, with tears or with silence, and I, believing myself to be a good father, had always given her the benefit of the doubt. I remembered an occasion when she disappeared from home for 2 days, when she was 17. She came back saying she had stayed at a friend's house. I didn't question her. I only asked her not to repeat it. Months later, I found out by chance that she had been with an older man, a married guy. When I confronted her, she screamed at me that I had no right to meddle in her life, that she was no longer a child. That day, instead of imposing authority, I lowered my head and convinced myself that it was all part of her youth. I was wrong. It was part of her character, of the poison she carried inside. And Eric was not a stranger in that equation. I knew from the beginning that he saw me as an ATM, more than a father-in-law. He always asked about my savings, about the value of the land where I have the workshop, about the house where I still live. At first, he disguised it as family interest, but over the years, he didn't even bother to hide it. One day, I heard him talking on the phone, believing I wasn't nearby. He was telling someone, "When the old man kicks the bucket, Sarah and I are set." His words drilled into my head. I didn't confront him in that moment, but I never forgot that phrase. My daughter's mask fell that Sunday, but Eric's had been cracking for some time. Sarah, with her insult, only confirmed what I already knew, that in her house I was an uncomfortable guest, a nuisance they tolerated just to keep the hope of inheriting. What hurt me most wasn't the greed, but that Sarah lent herself to that game because while Eric was an opportunist, she was my daughter, the girl who one day told me I was the only one who was always there. And nevertheless, she had decided to turn that closeness into a weapon to use my love as a weakness. The insult wasn't just a humiliation. It was a calculated blow, the open declaration that she no longer needed me, and that the only thing she wanted from me was my silence and my inheritance. That same night, I received a call from David. His voice was low, as if he were speaking in hiding. "Dad," he said to me, "don't take Sunday so seriously. Sarah was nervous. She got out of hand." I stayed mute for a few seconds. Then I responded, "Nervous. Your sister called me a disgusting old man in front of my grandkids. That is not a mistake, David. That is what she thinks of me." On the other side, there was a long silence. Finally, my son whispered, "Me. I also think Sarah has changed. Eric has poisoned her dad. She isn't the same anymore." "No, David." I told him she was always the same. I didn't want to see it. I hung up with a shrunken heart. It was the first time David recognized something similar to what I felt. But it was already late. The masks had fallen, and what was shown behind was a face I could no longer love without reservations. I sat in the armchair in the dining room with the light off, surrounded by shadows. I remembered Teresa's words, "Protect her even from herself." And I understood that protecting doesn't always mean giving. Sometimes it means taking away what hurts the most, what binds the most, what feeds the monster the most. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt thinking about punishing my daughter. It wasn't an outburst of a wounded father. It was the clarity of a man who had seen too much and could no longer continue being blind. The insult, the laughter, the silence of everyone, none of that was improvised. It was the culmination of years of contempt, and I knew with the certainty of those who were decided that the time had come to settle accounts. Monday morning, I called Mr. Miller's office again. This time I didn't do it in an outburst in front of the whole family, but in the solitude of my workshop with the smell of wood impregnating the walls and the calm of knowing exactly what I was doing. The phone rang twice before his secretary answered with that mechanical voice that I always find uncomfortable. "Mr. Michael, the lawyer, was waiting for you," she told me as if she knew that sooner or later I would call. Upon hearing the deep voice of the lawyer, I felt a strange weight in my chest, a mixture of relief and betrayal, because what I was about to do was not a whim, nor even a momentary retaliation. It was something I had been preparing for months long before the lunch. The truth is that I had already drafted a rough copy of my new will a while ago. Sunday was nothing more than the spark that lit the fuse. Miller knew my doubts, my fears, my complaints. More than once I had confided in him how much it hurt to see Sarah transformed into someone I barely recognized. He would listen to me in silence, taking notes with his tight handwriting, as if he knew that every word of mine would be key for what sooner or later would materialize. And that day, with a firm voice, I told him, "The moment has arrived. I want it in writing. My daughter Sarah remains out of the will." On the other end of the line, a brief silence like confirmation. "I understand, Mr. Michael. And the rest, does it stay as we discussed?" I nodded, although he couldn't see me. "Yes, everything just as we discussed." I hung up and stood still with the phone in my hand, feeling like I had just ripped out a part of my heart. Because Sarah, however traitorous, however ungrateful, was my daughter. And excluding her from what I built over a whole lifetime wasn't easy, even if it was fair. But at the same time, that decision gave me a strange peace, like someone finally taking off an unbearable weight. I poured myself a coffee and sat next to the workbench. The woods were piled in a corner, waiting to be sanded, converted into furniture, into memories. I thought about how I had always lived surrounded by things that transformed. A log could be a table, a chair, a coffin, and now it was my turn to transform myself, to go from a complacent father to an implacable man. What Sarah and Eric ignored was that I had already foreseen their greed. I wasn't naive, however much they believed it. Every fake smile, every calculated gesture of affection had shown me what they really wanted from me. That is why long before that meal I had decided that my inheritance would not be for them. The money they waited for, like vultures, was destined for another person, someone who had demonstrated loyalty without asking for anything in return. While I drank the coffee, I remembered Sarah's face. When she heard my call at the table, that purple color in her face, that mixture of rage and fear. It was the confirmation that everything I suspected for years was true. My daughter didn't cry for love, but for money. She didn't scream from a wound, but from greed. That certainty hurt me, but it also gave me strength. In the afternoon, I went personally to the lawyer's office. I walked slowly, leaning on my cane, and upon entering the smell of paper and ink hit me like a reminder of the definitive. Mr. Miller received me with a handshake and led me to his office. There on the table was the document already prepared. I read every word with attention. Every clause was a hammer blow on the image I still kept of Sarah, as that girl in the yellow dress running through the yard. I signed with a firm hand, although inside my soul was trembling. Upon finishing, the lawyer looked at me with respect and said, "Not everyone has the courage to do what you just did." I only nodded. Courage wasn't the word. It was more like desperation or perhaps justice. Upon leaving the office, the cold afternoon air hit my face. I breathed deep. The weight on my shoulders seemed to have lightened. I walked a few blocks with the feeling that something had changed forever. There was no turning back now. While returning home, a disturbing thought invaded me. Sarah would not stay with her arms crossed. I knew her too well. Her pride, her arrogance, and her ambition would not allow her to accept calmly what I had decided. Sunday had been merely a spark. What would come next would be fire. That night when I went to bed, I felt that the house was emptier than ever. Teresa wasn't there. My grandchildren had rejected me and Sarah. Sarah no longer existed for me, but at the same time something new had been born, a plan. And the worst part, the thing everyone feared but did not know yet, was just beginning. The hardest part was not facing Sarah, nor signing that will that left her out of everything. The hardest part was accepting the look from my grandchildren, that contempt in their little eyes, which pierced me more than any adult insult, because I could endure my daughter hating me. I could stand Eric's greed, even David's cowardly silence. But what I could not accept was that the children's laughter carried my name turned into a mockery. Days passed, and I did not see them again. Not a visit. Not a call. Nothing. The silence was the cruelest answer because it confirmed that in the minds of those kids, I was already the smelly grandpa, the disgusting old man they had to stay away from. I wondered what they would remember of me when they grew up, the walks to the park, the stories I invented, the smell of wood on my hands, or only that scene frozen in their memories of their mother pointing at me as if I were a leper. I remember with precision the first time I held Justin, the oldest. He was a fragile newborn with a blue beanie covering his head. I was trembling more than him, afraid of hurting him. Teresa was still alive then, and she looked at me smiling, telling me, "Calm down, Mike. You are his grandfather. He knows it." That sensation of tenderness remained engraved like a tattoo on my chest, and thinking that this same boy, 9 years later, would tell me in a cold voice, "Mom is right, you smell bad," broke me into pieces every time I remembered it. With the other three, it was the same. I taught Lucy how to ride a bike. I ran behind her until I ran out of air, picking her up every time she fell. "You can do it, my girl, you can do it," I repeated to her. The day she finally managed to move forward without falling, she hugged me, screaming, "Grandpa, I did it." That little girl now hid her face in her mother's shoulder as if I were a monster. Matt and Claire were smaller, but even so they had laughed with me. They had played building little wooden houses with scraps from my workshop. They asked me to teach them how to hammer nails, and I pretended I needed their help so they would feel important. Now they also looked at me with the same gesture of rejection learned from their mother. The pain from the grandchildren is a slow poison. It does not kill immediately, but it corrodes from the inside, leaving a void impossible to fill. I found myself talking to the walls, imagining they were there, asking them for forgiveness for being the grandfather who did not know how to protect them from their mother's cruelty. I dreamed of them with their voices calling me, and I woke up with an empty bed and a dry throat from crying so much in silence. There was an afternoon when I thought about looking for them, showing up at Sarah's house and demanding to see them, but I stopped myself. What right did I have to barge into their lives if they had already condemned me? What was I going to gain? Another humiliation, another insult repeated by innocent lips. No, I decided to stay in my house, hugging the memories as if they were sacred relics. I sat in the workshop and took out from the drawer the drawings they once made for me, clumsy scribbles of little houses of trees, of figures with mustaches that I guarded like treasures. In one, Justin had written for my grandpa, the strongest in the world. I read those words over and over again like someone caressing a scar, and I asked myself at what moment he stopped seeing me like that to start seeing me as a nuisance. The pain made me more lucid. I understood that Sarah had not only taken her love from me, but she had contaminated my grandchildren's love too. It was as if she had ripped out my roots and rotted them with poison, and I could not allow that legacy to be the only one left of me. One night, while I was trying to sleep, I felt Teresa's voice again, as if she were whispering to me from beyond. "Don't give up, Mike. They are still children. Some day they will see the truth." But I was not so sure. The poison of a mother is powerful, and sometimes it lasts a lifetime. However, in that same whisper, I found a new determination. If Sarah had turned my grandkids into my judges, I would do what was necessary, so that one day they would face the truth of who their grandfather really was. The idea of vengeance, which until then was just a murmur, began to take shape. It was no longer about money or inheritances, but about memory. I was not going to allow my story to be summarized in an insult repeated at a Sunday table. No. My name had to weigh, it had to rumble, it had to leave a mark, and even if it cost me my life, I would make those children remember who I really was. What they did not know was that I had already started pulling the strings, and soon, very soon, the masks would fall, not only from my daughter, but from everyone. That night I turned on the bedroom lamp and took out a handkerchief from my nightstand drawer that still kept Teresa's perfume. It had been more than 20 years since she died, but every time I brought the fabric close to my face, The faint smell of lavender returned me to our shared bed. To the early mornings when she stroked my hair while I arrived exhausted from the carpentry shop, I closed my eyes, and like so many times before, I started talking to her. Not with a loud voice, but with the voice one keeps in the soul, the one that does not need sound to feel heard. Teresa, I murmured, I know you hear me. I know that somehow you are here seeing what is happening. What did I do wrong? Where did I make a mistake with Sarah? You always said I was too hard, too strict, that I should learn to let go a little. Could it be that I lost her because I never learned to do it? The silence of the room filled with her imagined presence. I saw her sitting in the chair in front of me with her blue dress, with that serene gesture that always calmed my storms. Do not punish yourself, Mike, she seemed to tell me. You did what you could with the tools you had. Not all children know how to receive the love given to them. I broke down then because her voice, although invented in my tired mind, gave me back something I no longer found in anyone else: understanding. I told her everything as if she had not seen it from wherever she was. I told her about Sarah's insult, the laughter of the grandkids, the call to the notary, the definitive signature that erased our daughter from the inheritance. Saying it out loud, it hurt me even more. Do you really believe I did the right thing? I asked her as if Teresa could absolve me. In my memory, she caressed my hand. What you did was necessary. Sarah chose a path that is not ours. You cannot force her to love what she despises, but you still have something to do. That last phrase resonated in my mind like a command. You still have something to do. I did not know what it was exactly, but I felt I could not stay with my arms crossed, waiting for life to consume itself in the silence of my workshop and my loneliness. There was one more step one that implied facing not only Sarah and Eric, but also my grandchildren, the memory they were building of me. I looked at Teresa's photo on the dresser. Her smile was the same as always, but in my eyes it mixed with reproach. You left too soon, I told her, and you left me this burden alone. You knew how to reach Sarah, how to calm her, how to show her what mattered. I did not know how to do it. Maybe if you had been here, everything would be different. The silence became unbearable. I stood up. I went to the workshop and turned on the light. Among the tools, I found a wooden box I had made years ago to keep letters. There were several notes that Teresa had left me when she was sick. Brief messages, but full of love. Thank you for not leaving me alone. You are my strength. Do not forget the children need you. Reading them, an idea started to grow in me. What if those words, those letters someday reached the hands of my grandchildren? What if they discovered by themselves the truth of who I was, of who Teresa and I were? Vengeance, I understood. It should not be just an economic punishment against Sarah. It had to be also an act of memory. She could poison my grandchildren today, but she could not control what they discovered tomorrow. And I would make sure that when they grew up, they knew who their grandfather really was. I stayed in the workshop until sunrise, talking to Teresa as if she were sitting next to me. I promised her I would not leave this world without leaving a clear, indelible trace of what I had done and what I had been. They will not steal my story, I told her, pressing the box of letters against my chest. When the sun entered through the window, I felt she was smiling at me from somewhere, and although I remained broken inside, I had a new certainty. The worst was yet to happen, but this time it would not find me defenseless. The following days I spent in silence, moving through my house like a ghost. But inside I was no longer a defeated man, but someone who was building a plan. I realized I could not keep waiting for Sarah and Eric to continue corrupting the memory my grandchildren had of me. It was the moment to act, not only with words, but with deeds that left a mark. I started organizing the will papers. Mr. Martin, the attorney, had given me several sealed envelopes with official copies, and one of them was destined to be opened only after my death. But I did not plan to wait that long. I had decided that part of my revenge would be seen in life with my own eyes. I not only wanted Sarah to be out of the will, I wanted her to know that everything she hoped to receive from me was crumbling already. That morning I went to the bank with my hands full of calluses. I signed the papers to transfer a significant sum, not all but enough, to a local foundation that helped low-income children learn trades. I had always dreamed that one of my grandkids would learn carpentry that they would carry in their hands, the smell of wood and the dignity of work. If Sarah had decided to rip that away from them, I would at least give it to other children who did want to receive it. I felt Teresa accompanied me while I signed, as if she approved every stroke of my pen. Then I called David, my youngest son, the only one who still kept a shred of loyalty. We agreed to meet at a discreet coffee shop far from the ears of Sarah and Eric. When he arrived, I saw him more aged than I remembered, with hair sprinkled with gray and tired eyes. He sat in front of me without saying a word. "Dad," he started. "Sarah is furious. She says you're going to regret this." I took a deep breath before responding. "David, I do not care about her fury. What matters to me is that you know the truth. I'm not going to leave a single dollar to your sister or to Eric. I'm not going to reward their contempt." He nodded slowly, lowering his gaze. "I do not want anything from you, Dad. I just want you not to end up alone." Those words pierced me more than any insult. I reached out my hand and put it over his. "I'm not going to be alone, son. I have your mother, I have my memories, and now I have a plan." David looked at me with wet eyes as if he wanted to ask me what plan that was, but he did not dare. And I did not tell him. Not yet. Upon returning to the workshop, I took out Teresa's box of letters and started organizing them. I had decided that each grandchild would receive one when they reached a certain age, with photos, memories, and my voice recorded on old tapes I'd kept in a drawer. I wanted that when they grew up, they would discover by themselves the truth about their grandfather. It did not matter how much poison their mother put in them now. Sooner or later, those letters would be a mirror in which they would see themselves reflected and perhaps ashamed. But not everything would be so clean. I had also decided to expose Sarah and Eric. For years, I had kept proof of their greed messages, recordings documents. Eric had asked me for money for family investments that never existed. Sarah had lied to me about loans that were actually whims. I, who had always been the naive father, had kept everything. Now that archive would be my weapon. While I classified the evidence in folders, I felt my hands returning to the firmness of before. They were no longer the hands of a defeated old man, but of a man who knows exactly what he is building. Each sheet, each receipt, each printed message was like a nail in the structure of my plan, a silent but forceful vengeance. That night I went to bed late, exhausted, but with a new energy. I closed my eyes and saw Teresa's face. This time she did not look at me with reproach or sadness, but with a slight pride. "That is right, Mike," she seemed to tell me. "Do not let them erase you." I smiled in the dark. For the first time in a long time, I felt it was not me who was losing, but them, and I knew that what I was preparing would not only take away the money they coveted, but would strip their lies naked in front of everyone. Sarah believed she could laugh at me at the Sunday table. Soon she would discover that the old man she called disgusting still had an edge in his soul. The worst, I thought, before sleeping, has not happened yet. But this time when it arrives, I will be the one who provokes it. The afternoon everything exploded. The sky was gray and the city seemed to hold its breath. I did what I had to do. I contacted the journalist who had been attentive to my story for weeks. It was not for fame or public revenge. It was for the need for the truth to have witnesses. I handed her the folders with invoices, messages, and the receipts of the loans that Eric never returned. She took the evidence with a calm that impressed me and promised to publish. The next day, before dawn, the journalist called me. "It comes out today," she said. I felt a deep vertigo. When the article appeared in the digital edition, the news spread with the speed of gunpowder. They did not mention everything immediately, but enough. Suspicious transfers, inexplicable expenses, forged contracts. People started commenting in low voices. I walked down the sidewalk and heard my name spoken as if it were a rumor in a cafe. Some looked at me with compassion, others with curiosity, others with reservations. They called me from the radio station. I entered the booth and told my truth without embellishments. I spoke of the insult at the table, of the years of indifference, of the evidence that had remained in those folders. I did not seek to lavish gratuitous rage. My voice only carried the fatigue of a man who no longer wanted to be invisible. I felt that by speaking something fractured, and at the same time was liberated, the truth no longer fit in the silence. At noon I saw a truck arrive at my daughter's house. They took out boxes and furniture that I once considered inheritable, and I saw Eric with his face undone suitcases, half-packed. People who previously applauded his successes now lowered their gaze. Sarah was screaming, trying to recompose the story, to explain the inexplicable with words that sounded hollow, but the evidence was clear, and the city, curious and fast, was already spreading it. The children knew before I imagined. In the mid-afternoon, Justin called me. His voice trembled and let slip that people were talking at school. "Grandpa, they are saying things at school," he murmured. I felt the earth opening under my feet. I tried to explain to him with simple words that there were facts that Mom and Eric had hidden that I did not want them to know like this. He asked me if I was bad. I did not want him to believe it. I told him I loved him, that he was the only thing that did not enter into this adult matter. He hung up and my chest remained empty. The school filled with whispering parents. Some defended Sarah and spoke of a vengeful father. Others looked at Eric with suspicion. The truth, I thought, does not forgive. When it runs, it leaves a mark on everyone. The next day, my phone rang. It was David. "Dad, you complicated things for a home," he said. He reproached me for having exposed everything without measuring the damage to the children. I tried to explain to him that I had done what I had to, that I could not sustain the lie any longer. He repeated his fear that the family would break. And I heard in his voice the confusion of someone who looks at the family with new eyes for the first time. Then something happened that no one expected. Eric tried to flee. I wanted to believe it was a stupid impulse, but the police were already alert due to complaints and bank movements. They intercepted him at the airport with suitcases and hasty documentation. There were struggles. The live broadcast showed his pale face, the wrinkled shirt, the trembling hands. Cameras do not forgive. They filmed him handcuffed, humiliated. Sarah, distracted by the tragedy she herself had created, appeared at the police station, broken, begging for explanations, offering money to silence everyone. I cannot deny that I felt an immediate relief. That man would no longer look at me with superiority, but the joy was brief. My daughter's reaction was devastating in another way. She chased the journalist, hurled accusations, and offered bribes. She tried to recover control as if reputation could be sown with bills. The journalist maintained her decision. The report stayed. Seeing Sarah beg for respect and seeing Eric handcuffed broke me inside and at the same time gave me the certainty that the truth, although cruel, worked. At the same time, the press began to question my methods. Some columnists pointed at me as guilty of exposing the children, of not having protected family affection. There was no lack of voices expressing that it had been excessive. It hurt me because I acted from pain and the need not to be forgotten, but I had to admit that my action was not harmless. It removed roots, and the fall reached branches I never thought I would touch. That night, in the gloom of the workshop, my phone rang again. It was Sarah. She spoke as if the words were knives tearing her voice. "Dad, we have lost everything," she said. She broke into sobs. The children asked for explanations. Work was escaping her. Shame pursued her. "What did you want?" she asked me. I confessed the truth with the coldness of the inevitable. I wanted them to know, for them to know, and to rectify. We found no comfort. We hung up like two strangers. The following week brought more consequences. Neighbors left letters of support at my door, and other people wrote reproaches on social networks. Sarah's reputation remained damaged. Eric's was irreparable for the moment. My grandkids were confused. David appeared distant, and yet in a corner of the workshop an anonymous note appeared among the wooden slats. A photo of young Teresa and a brief sentence. Your story gave us courage. We are with you. I did not know who left it, but those words gave me comfort. I had achieved what I wanted. The truth was out, but at the price of an emotional earthquake that had reached those I loved the most. I asked myself with the honesty that only the night offers, if the truth had been worth so much pain. I found no simple answer. I only knew that the worst had happened. My daughter's mask and her husband's had fallen. The town had seen it, and everyone's life changed. And I kept going. After the scandal came the silence, a silence heavier than any scream, more unbearable than any insult. Calls and visits no longer arrived. Not even David, who was always the closest, dared to appear at the house. And my grandchildren, they vanished from my life as if they had never existed. They were not guilty, I knew, but the absence of their voices was the cruelest punishment. I spent the mornings sitting in the workshop observing the wooden boards that I no longer had the strength to convert into anything. The sawdust covered the floor like forgotten snow, and I stepped on it with my cane, listening to the crunch like someone stepping on dry leaves. Inside, they're surrounded by tools that had been my pride. I felt that my real inheritance was not the money or the property, but that silence that now accompanied me. I wondered if Sarah thought of me if ever amidst the chaos of lawyers, journalists, and gossiping neighbors, she remembered that I had been her father. I like to imagine that in some corner of her memory there still remained the echo of the little girl, running in a yellow dress, laughing while I chased her, but immediately I corrected myself. The Sarah of now was not that little girl. That little girl had died with her mother, and in her place, someone I no longer recognized had remained. At night, I talked to Teresa, not out loud, because I feared the neighbors would think I was losing my mind, but inside me. I told her that the house was too empty, that the dining table had lost meaning, that the coffee tasted like ash. I told her that the distance from the grandkids hurt me more than Sarah's betrayal, and she in my imagination answered me the same thing. Hang in there, Mike. The truth is slow, but it arrives. One day I received a letter. It was not from Sarah or Eric, but from a woman who had worked years ago in my workshop, helping with small orders. She said she had read the story in the newspaper, that she knew how Sarah and her husband really were, and that I should not feel alone. The letter was brief, but it tore tears from me, because sometimes comfort does not come from blood, but from those you did not expect. Mr. Martin called me too. He wanted to make sure I remained firm in my decision. I told him yes. Sarah would not see a dime of what cost me so much sacrifice. That money would go to David and to the foundation I had chosen. And more importantly, the memories, Teresa's letters, and my recordings were already organized for my grandchildren. Someday when they were older, they would have the opportunity to see who I really was, far from their mother's words. The silence in the house pushed me to reflect excessively. I discovered that one can survive without company, but not without memory. The only thing keeping me standing was knowing that my story would not die with me, that Sarah's poison would not be the last word. That was my true inheritance. Not the money, not the properties, but the truth written on papers, in letters, in the recorded voice I had left for when I could no longer defend myself. And so in the middle of that silence, I understood something. The vengeance had been fulfilled, but it had not returned my daughter or my grandchildren to me. It had left me alone with my memories and my ghosts. It was a high price, perhaps, too high, but it was the only one I could pay. The last time I gathered strength to set the table was a Sunday like that lunch that changed everything. I placed the white tablecloth with the flowers embroidered by Teresa. I placed 6 glasses, although I knew only I would sit down, and opened a bottle of wine I had saved for years. I did it with the calm of someone preparing a ritual, knowing it was the last one. I poured slowly and raised the glass to the empty air. I toasted to Teresa for the days when we laughed together without thinking about tomorrow. I toasted to David, who, although distant, still kept something of goodness. I toasted to my grandchildren, even though they had looked at me with contempt, because someday when they read my letters, they would know their grandfather was not the monster they were painted. And I toasted also to Sarah, my daughter, not for what she was, but for what she once was for the little girl in the yellow dress who ran through the patio, for the teenager who told me I was the only one who was always there. That girl deserved a toast, even if the woman she became did not deserve it. I left the glass on the table and took the envelope I had prepared. It was my last letter, written with my trembling handwriting, addressed to my whole family. There I explained what I had done, the will that excluded her, the inheritance destined for others, the truth I had left recorded on tapes and papers. I did not write it with rage, but with the serenity of a man who knows he has nothing left to lose. I told them that some day when the fury and shame dissipated, they would understand that I did not want to destroy, but to make clear who I was, that I would not allow my memory to be reduced to an insult at a Sunday table. And I ended with a phrase I knew Sarah would never forget. Daughter, money can buy you silence, but not memory. And what you did not want to remember about me, others will remember for you. I folded the letter, put it next to the notary's sealed envelope, and left them on the table. Then I poured myself another glass of wine and drank it slowly, as if I wanted to stop time. The clock marked 10 at night. Outside, the city slept. Inside, my heart also began to get tired. That was my farewell, a toast in solitude, a testament written not only in papers, but in acts. I do not know if Sarah will ever mourn me. I do not know if my grandchildren will understand the magnitude of what happened. The only thing I know is that when I raise my last glass, my voice will remain in every letter, in every memory, in every truth I hid for them. And when that letter is read, when my words rumble in their hands, the true vengeance will be fulfilled, because then they will no longer be able to laugh at me. They will have to look in the mirror and recognize what they did. That will be my last toast, and I know that in silence Teresa will be toasting with me.